Welcome to Clear Conversations, Entrepreneurial Legacies with your host, John Sleeting, an executive partner for Clearwater Capital Partners. Join John and his guests on this exclusive journey behind the scenes of extraordinary entrepreneurial families. In this series, we will dive deep into the stories of John's guests, who generously unveil the paths they've walked, the challenges they've overcome, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Throughout these conversations, we explore their achievements beyond mere recognition, disclosing the distinctive perspectives that have shaped their entrepreneurial journeys. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacy Series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Jeff DeHaan, a partner of Clearwater Capital Partners, lead advisor within Clearwater Capital Advisory, Chief Compliance Officer, and I could go on and on. You'll learn more about Jeff. And I'm also joined by Kevin Nolte. He's the Manager of Advanced Planning for Clearwater Capital Advisors and works closely with the advisory team, solving the most complex challenges that families face across the wealth spectrum. They're both highly credentialed individuals. They both have life-lived experiences personally and how it applies to this concept of wealth management and the stewardship challenges that we all face. So I look forward to this conversation. You're going to learn a lot. You might want to get out a pad of paper and a pencil, and we're going to have a great conversation today. Jeff and Kevin, welcome. So excited to dive into this conversation to kick off the new year and talk about planning and wealth transfer strategies. And there's no two better individuals than the two of you to dive in. The character of who you are and the technical competency that you bring to the families that we serve at Clearwater Capital is enormous. And I've got great respect for the both of you and really looking forward to diving into this session together. So welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Want to start? Actually, and Jeff, I'm going to start with you, right? Partner, love being a partner with you, love and come to you for technical advice and getting to know who you are for the last 15 years as we've been working together. And yet I still find myself, as I'm preparing for these sessions, of learning new items about individuals. So I'm actually going to read a few of the items off of the bio, and I'm going to start on the character side of who you guys are. And then we'll move into competency and how we think about these things more broadly. But on the character side, Jeff, you volunteer and give of your time and your talent in so many ways. You're currently the treasurer of Crime Stoppers of Greater McHenry County. You're a member of the leadership of Greater McHenry County Class of 2015. You're currently on the board of directors, and you're on the curriculum committee. You're a member of the City of Crystal Lakes Economic Development Committee. You're on the board of directors for United Way of Greater McHenry County, have been for 9 years. 2 of those 9 years, you served as the president. You've been recognized in the county for Best Under 40. And you also have a lot of technical competency type recognition. We'll come back to that later, right? So on the character, what spurs you? So when you think about this word legacy, what does that mean to you? And what spurs you on to be doing all of this work in your community?
I think so. Legacy means something different to every person, and there's different levels of legacy that you have to consider as well. So to me, at the highest level, my legacy is what I want to see the world look like when my time on this earth is over. Right. And from there, my desire is to be intentional around making that vision of the future happen as much as I possibly can. And that starts with my family and my friends, my community, my country, the world, and kind of goes from there. So I think the biggest component of what has driven it, of all of the different volunteerism and philanthropy that I've done, has been that vision of what I want the world to look like when I'm gone, and just kind of backing up from there. Yeah. Where can I go to make that happen?
And so several items that you had, it's different for every person. So all of our listeners are thinking through, well, what does this mean to me? Yeah. And frankly, I think we need to deal with our own mortality and what is it that I want the world to look like? Am I making a difference? And every day, are you being intentional? You hit on that. In terms of putting the next brick in the wall, so to speak, in terms of building that legacy during your time here on Earth. Because you can't write your legacy after you've passed. Right. You have to be doing that every day and being intentional about that too. And so much of that has to be addressed by every individual, right? Independent of their level of wealth, when we talk about the financial side. but everyone has to be intentional about that understanding of answering that question for themselves. So Kevin, how have you been processing this concept of legacy and what that means?
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly echo everything Jeff had there. He's been certainly a great partner, example to follow in that regard. But yeah, I view legacy really as everything you leave behind once you're gone. Primarily family, reputational influence, as well as any business or that type of legacy as well.
Yeah, well, the effect on employees that you leave behind, and so none of the items that you just hit on, as the manager of advanced planning for Clearwater Capital, right? None of the items really point to it's the estate documents, it's the tax returns, it's the finance. All of those are tools to be used both during your lifetime and how items are taken care of after your passing. But the legacy component is really more about the life you live, right? And the impact that you're having on employees or your family and the people around you too. So we'll come back to just examples so that and none of our listeners are getting concerned. There will be no confidential private information shared during this conversation. But I am, and I know the rest of the team is inspired by our clients every day because we get to see we get the opportunity to serve just some fantastic people that we learn from as we're coming alongside them to help them create that legacy that they want for themselves. So Jeff, I want to go back to you. Where did you learn this from? Was this modeled by your parents, your grandparents? I mean, where did you pick this up?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The intentionality behind legacy and really everything that you do was something that was very heavily modeled by my parents. And I remember being probably 7 years old in elementary school, and they would take me out of school to go to the United Way of Greater McHenry County's annual launching breakfast. So
you've been on the board for 9 years, but you've been serving there since you were 7 years old.
Exactly. Okay. But the intentionality behind it was not get him involved with United Way. It was show him ways that you can take action to do what you want to do, right? To get that vision played to happen, right? Nothing happens by accident over time, right? We don't want to get lucky and find out that our legacy is where we want it to be. We want to make it what we want to make it. And it's so interesting to me that so many of our clients are so intensely purposeful around their business, around their work. Yet once you get outside of that, they aren't. And a lot of that's because they're focusing so much of their time and energy focused on that business or that job that is making them as successful as they have been. And that doesn't leave a lot of space or mental power left to continue that process elsewhere. But in a lot of cases, it's just they don't know how. They've never had that modeling. And I think that's what my parents came back with. They were very intentional about building their business and the impact on their community that they wanted that to have. But they also wanted to make sure that they showed us that it's not just work, right? It's not just the monetary component. You've got to be purposeful about everything from your family to your legacy.
Well, and if I've got this right, and you shared previously, your parents didn't grow up that way. It's not like your grandparents modeled that for them. So what is it you've learned from your parents about that intentionality to say it's going to be different for us and for our kids versus what they necessarily grew up in? What do you think is the magic in that for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the example that they had, while not a negative thing, my grandparents were philanthropic. They just didn't have that intentionality behind it, right? In other words, it was a little bit more piecemealed. They didn't have that solid vision of kind of what their goals were for that legacy. And so again, I think that was they realized what they didn't have and wanted to make sure that if their kids didn't live that way, it wasn't because they didn't know how. It wasn't because they didn't have those tools in their tool belts. And that's hence why from such a young age, it really was, I tell people, it was an indoctrination to a mindset of not just philanthropy, but just life in general, right? Which is action makes results, not luck.
And everyone hates the budget word, right? And so we talk about that in terms of the context of planning. So to be intentional, you have to plan to be intentional.
Absolutely.
You have to not just stumble into it, like you said. So Kevin, you are the manager of advanced planning. Can you help listeners understand what's basic planning versus what's advanced planning in some of the work that you do on behalf of the clients we serve?
Yeah, John, it's a great question. Basic planning is really what all of us should have at any asset level, any level of complexity. We all really should have a will, power of attorney set up, and possibly a revocable trust. Advanced planning that starts to become necessary when the overall estate becomes more complex, the income streams become more complex, or the family situation becomes complex for various reasons.
Yeah. And so on the basic side, so I agree, even someone with $100 million balance sheet needs the basic will, revocable trust, powers of attorney, right? So everyone needs that basic component, that cornerstone. And then it becomes a question regarding how much complexity you add into that. There's different things that people are solving for, right? And there's always three parts of the pie that I look at. The assets are going to be preserved for your family, charity is important to you, or it's going to taxes. We have never met anybody. You're a CPA, Kevin, right? We haven't met anybody that says, I want to pay more taxes. We'll let the government decide how to allocate that. It wants to come back and say, I want to allocate to charities like Jeff is engaged with as examples, or for my family and how that plays out, back tying to the legacy, the bigger questions of why. But can you give people a little bit of a flavor of like what's the estate tax? In certain states, there's the death tax on top of the federal estate tax. Can you share with individuals like how that plays out in some real simple examples of the math, because the stakes are really high?
Yeah, certainly. So today for 2024, the estate tax lifetime exemption amount is about $13.5 million for a single individual, double that for a married couple. In Illinois, where we sit, there's a $4 million exemption for each individual. Yeah. So any amount over that 4 million or over that 13.5 million, that's going to be subject to an estate tax, whether it be state or federal. And at the federal level, it's pretty steep. It gets up to 40% pretty quickly. So if you have $100 million that's subject to the tax threshold, you're looking at potentially a $40 million tax bill.
Yeah. So let's do the math quickly. If you have a $100 million taxable estate, and it's a couple, let's assume, right? So that 13.61 to be technically right. I mean, again, you're the CPA, but yeah, right. But let's use the 13.5. That's 27 million that's excluded from estate tax. So 27 million excluded from the estate tax means that there is 73 million that's subject to estate tax at 40%. So you do the math, right? It's easier, 28 to $30 million of estate tax federally. Now, depending on the state that you're in, like Illinois, I mean, it's a sliding scale. It ranges. You're down to the exemption of $4 million per individual. This is where you get to north of that 40 million really quickly. And a lot of people haven't done that math, and they don't know that there's advanced planning techniques that can come in to help alleviate that. Now, it's not just to avoid, not to avoid taxes, right? But to reduce taxes and reduce the tax liability based on the tools that can be used. And that's to work to preserve it for your family and to preserve it for those charitable organizations important to you, and reduce the tax burden that's there. And though the family and those charities are what Jeff is saying, right? It's reflective of what I want to do and leave behind when I'm gone. And if I can do that and reduce taxes and leave more through my own planning, then that's what I want to do. And that's what we do with the families that we serve. So give a little bit of a flavor of advanced planning, just a couple snippets, and we'll come back to it a little bit more in detail.
Yeah. So once you get to the kind of advanced planning threshold where the taxable estate starts to become a concern, when you're worried about that 40% tax rate, it still is somewhat of a spectrum, I'd say, in the activities you'll do to avoid that state tax and efficiently transfer assets to the next generation. I'd say it starts.
So hold that thought, because we'll kind of come back and dig into that as examples further. So you talk about you being a CPA, certified public accountant, and your work with EY in your background and family office and in this space and having that tax. Jeff, you're a certified financial planner. Can you explain to listeners what does it mean to be a certified financial planner?
Certified financial planning designation is kind of the gold standard for our industry on a wide range of topics. So in other words, it forces you to learn everything from investments to basic estate planning tools and techniques, to basic tax knowledge, and everything in between, so that when you approach a case, you're coming at it from a planning versus product perspective, right? It starts with identifying the problem that you have, understanding the opportunity set or what kind of assets are and tools are available to you for that specific case, and then coming up with solutions beyond just stocks and bonds and mixes that should be there. So it really is intended to give you a whole comprehensive view of the balance sheet and the ability to do that.
Right. And so the way we at Clearwater Capital are set up, it is the team in terms of how we work together, whether being with Kevin in his part of the business in terms of the advanced planning, portfolio management, and the investment portfolio of how we deal with things, operations team members, and with each other, right? So as partners, we have lead partner responsibilities. We have lead advisory responsibilities back with families, and we're still tapping into the entire team. So when you have your partner hat on, lead advisor hat, you're working with a family, how do you link up this dialogue regarding legacy development, what's important, the objectives that family is trying to achieve, back with the technical tools on the competency of how you actually even go do that? Where do you start in that dialogue? And where would a listener start to say, how do I get my head around all of these matters?
Yeah, and it is such a big topic, right? That most often the process is starting with just a conversation around where are you, where do you want to be, right? And for so many people, where they want to be is something that they've only given lip service to thus far, right? And oftentimes even between spouses, right? Two very different opinions on where they want to get at the end, let alone how they want to get there, right? So it starts with just having that conversation, leading them through the qualitative side of what are the goals, what is the vision of the legacy, and then once we've got an understanding of where we want to go, then we proceed to the next phase, which is where are we right now? What are the assets? What are the liabilities? Where are we in this theoretical roadmap? Right. And that then helps us path forward to say, using tools like Kevin is talking about, well, we're going to do this with that and this with that, and here's what's going to flow this way or that, and that's what's the best way for us to get to where you want it to be. But it starts with identifying where do you want to be at the end.
And all the great work that you do, right? And you're a resource to all of us in the office in terms of how you approach technical aspects back with families. You've been recognized in investment news for top 40 under 40, across the country. So you talk about your work locally, but you're recognized on a national basis by Investment News. Family Wealth Alliance recognized you as a rising star in terms of, again, somebody under 40. Do I sound envious of a little bit younger, even though you got a little bit more gray coming into the beard?
It doesn't show.
And being there. So you have national recognition for the work that you're doing with clients across the country and how you approach this. When you step back and think about the satisfaction that you get working with families, what are examples where you find personal fulfillment and satisfaction in that work coming alongside of a family?
I mean, every relationship is a little bit different, of course, and that in and of itself feeds the intellectual curiosity that I have, right? You're never seeing the same thing twice, even with similar opportunity sets, because so much of it is on that qualitative side of decision making. Examples of people that have really resonated, I think, people that have it's when the unexpected happens, right? We build these plans so that we know in a perfect world, this is where it's going to be. And we know when we put that into place, it's not going to play out the way we expect it to. Right. Life is going to change. It's going to happen, right? There's going to be road bumps. And so it is especially fulfilling when we are there when those road bumps happen, whether it be the passing of a loved one, the opportunity of a new business entity or something like that that's exciting and now means dramatically more complexity that we have to do. But especially in the cases where things aren't going the way that we had anticipated, that people really start to lean on us, right, for the direction and the guidance to help them make those good decisions,
Yeah.
that's when it gets really fulfilling.
But and there's examples, and maybe even for listeners to understand the aspect of the way that we're constructed, right? Because there's multiple different services we get involved with, especially when we get into the family office services with families that have just got more complexity. We have private client families that don't have the level of complexity. There's a different level of wealth, but we also don't turn our back on them. Retirement plan services, right? So the whole team that's focused on our business owners, our entrepreneurs, in their qualified planning, their non-qualified planning, and how that side of the business comes alongside to serve them as well, back through their employees, like you mentioned earlier, Kevin. So Kevin, share an example of like a private client relationship, again, where you find a lot of fulfillment in the work that's done, because it's needed, right? There might not be a lot of complexity, but there's still need because everyone in this world is trying to solve these challenges.
Yeah, on the private client side, really exactly what Jeff was saying, where the most fulfilling things on my end are when there is the kind of a negative bump in the road that kind of throws in a wrench into the initial plan and what our client had planned on doing, whether that be a passing of a loved one, a loss of a job.
You shared a story about, even sit with an individual that was recently widowed and just trying to make sense out of the world with the passing of a long-term spouse, and just how you process that, right? And the fulfillment, it wasn't huge challenging from a legal, tax, financial, how do you do all of this? But a lot of personal fulfillment. If I recall that correctly, and is there?
Yeah, exactly. In that scenario, it's really not only is the person who passed the primary earner, they likely kind of controlled all the finances in the family, so it might as well be speaking a different language when the surviving widow is looking at what to do with the life insurance payout, what to do with all the other assets that they've accumulated.
Yeah. Do they need to move?
Exactly.
The house?
So having the positive outcomes there is really fulfilling up for our end.
Jeff mentioned bumps in the roads, and it's not to minimize, right, the dramatic life change that can happen for people, but life happens, and then it usually ties back into, okay, there's either a need for money or there's now resources that have become available through whatever that might mean. It could be the items like death. We're always going through estate settlements with families because people continue to die. It's just that's part of life and how we approach it. Things happen within families, and divorce happens. So the loss, those items are traumatic for the individuals in how they approach it. And this is where I'm so proud of our team of coming along and reflecting our character of who we want to be, to come alongside these individuals and be there, because there are times, right, when we have to take out the tissue box because there are tears and there's heartache that's going on and there's grief that has to be processed, and yet technical decisions have to be made in those moments. And then at and no one escapes those sort of items in terms of life, but when there's more complexity, a lot of times, back to entrepreneurial families, there's businesses that come into play and structures that come into play and more technical needs that can be solved, again, to minimize the tax burden, to preserve for charity and family. And so there's events that happen there, business sales, liquidity events, tend to be a little bit more on the happier side of things when those are worked through. So can you share a little bit of examples then in terms of advanced planning and families? You brought up earlier, $100 million balance sheet, let's call it, and how you would be thinking about those individuals and how you come alongside and do the work that's needed for those individuals.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it all starts with meeting with the client and figuring out what's important to them. What do they want their legacy to be? And from that, we can take a look at the balance sheet, what the income profile is and all of that, and say what is realistic to accomplish these goals, to avoid as much tax as possible and responsibly pass these assets down to the next generation. You gave a good talk recently on charitable remainder trusts and why it's a good time for a variety of reasons.
I'm glad you thought it was a good talk. That's I want to mark that compliment right now. And I'm sorry, keep going.
But it's a really specific vehicle that makes sense for someone who's about to have a large liquidation event and is charitably minded.
And these are charitable remainder unit trusts that we spoke to. They do Page County, which is a Collier County of Chicago here in the western suburbs. Their bar association, where we were talking to a group of estate planning attorneys on how they're thinking about, writing the documents. But I think it's a great example of collaboration back with the estate planning attorney community, where the work that we do to model out and think through strategy and think through the totality of one's balance sheet and one's net assets, so that when the attorney does need to draft up the documents, there's a great starting point to launch from the work that we're doing with the families in advance. So I mean, but that collaboration piece that's in there, and then to come back on this charitable remainder unit trust, that was just a few months ago, end of Q4 of 2023, that we gave that conversation. Why is it now a good time for individuals to even be thinking about or asking the question about these what are called affectionately known as CRUTs?
Yeah, as I'm sure everyone knows, if they have turned on the news or have taken out a mortgage or bought a car, rates are up significantly in the last year or so. And that's really what it comes down to. The tax benefit of the charitable remainder unit trust is that you get an income tax deduction that is a function of where rates are at any given day. So the ability to put one in place when rates are higher, it essentially increases the charitable deduction, which will lower your income tax for that year.
So you can have a charitable deduction today. It's larger right now because it's a more attractive time with higher interest rates. And through the vehicle, you can also give yourself a cash flow stream back for a period of time. Usually we model that out for 20 years, where you now have cash flow coming back to you. And again, in the context of the overall structure, right? The overall plan, both the estate, the legal side of it, the financial plan that comes into place that you work through in order to assess and think through how do you minimize the income tax drag and the estate tax drag, achieve charitable purposes, and also give yourself cash flow to live on. And so that's one example. And you go through CRUTs and you go through CRATs and you go through lead trusts and there's all kinds of, we'll probably hit on a few more of the alphabet soup later. But it is that linking together of these technical tools that you do back with the work, Jeff, that the advisory team is working with the family on, saying, what is it you want to do in your lifetime? And what is that legacy that you want to leave behind? Where do you see, Jeff, most families get stuck with that conversation?
So first and foremost, it's having it in the first place, right? Again, so many people just don't know that this is something. They don't know how to talk about this. They don't know how to frame the discussion around what they want that legacy to be. Once they do start talking about it, the next kind of hurdle that we typically find is finding partners that are fluent in that, in the translation from goals to execution or strategy, right? Having partners that can say, okay, if that's what you want to do, this is how we should structure it to accomplish that most efficiently and effectively. And then, of course, the biggest holdup, or I'd say probably the place that we see the most failures, is on the actual execution. So people will go, they'll get these trusts drawn up, they'll get these plans made, and then they go in a drawer, nothing ever happens to them, right? And fast forward the tape, something has happened. Now we're looking to figure out what's happening. Where did this go? Oftentimes, none of the fancy planning that they had done previously actually got executed. And so it was literally just an early estate tax, right? They paid to the attorney. They need someone also in their corner that can play quarterback to make sure that not only does the plan meet the goals and align with the objectives and the assets and everything that's aligned with it, but to also make sure that it gets executed and maintained. People love the idea of these types of strategies, right? I have experience with them in my own family. And when you actually get to the rubber hitting the road, if you don't have someone that is calling those plays for you, they can become extremely problematic, both not just functionally, but emotionally, right? People don't realize that when you make that gift to charity or you put that house in the trust, right? those aren't there anymore. They're not yours anymore.
Right.
And so that oftentimes takes a little bit of the softer side of the relationship to help walk people through and keeping them focused on, this is why we're doing it. This is the benefit you're getting from it. Yes, there are complications that come with things. Nothing is ever smooth and easy that in this world,
Yeah.
right? But you've got someone here that's making sure you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's and keeping them focused on the end goal and not letting it fall apart because people have forgotten the why,
Right.
why we did this.
But in Jeff, we were meeting with a family recently. You reminded them that our role back with them is as that chief financial officer to the family, right?
Yeah.
The lead, call it the lead or the patriarch, matriarch, the first generation, maybe the wealth creator, and then how we engage the next generation to go through things. But as the CFO back for the family, they're the CEOs, right? They're setting their strategy, they're setting their goal, they're deciding what that legacy is that they want to be building and creating as the chief strategist of the family. But as the CFO, I love the point, planning. What is it? Planning without execution is, somebody once said, and I don't know who I'm supposed to give credit to on this, right? But planning without execution or strategy without execution is hallucination.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not executing, it doesn't matter, and you're spending a lot of money on either a estate plan or a financial plan, a tax plan, and you're not executing on that. Well, that is the CFO, and the responsibility and the role that we have back with the families we serve is making sure that we're staying on top of the execution on their behalf,
Yeah.
reminding them when filings need to be done, reminding them when the attorney needs to be revisited or taxes need to be done or gift returns need to be done, and incorporating that in. So I love the planning and execution linked in how we approach that back with the families we serve.
Yeah.
Now, you brought up another important part, which is, when you put the house or that asset, whatever the asset is, into an irrevocable trust structure, it's no longer there. So Kevin, when we talk about what's inside the taxable estate versus outside the taxable estate, what does that even mean, right? What is that considered? How is that looked at? How should listeners be thinking about, well, what do you mean I put my house in an irrevocable trust and it's no longer there? Physically, it's still there. What do you mean by that? It's now outside my taxable estate.
Yeah, so mechanically, to stick with the house example, usually what you'd use for that is called a qualifying personal residence trust, or commonly called a QPERT. And mechanically, the owner of the house will put the house in the trust, and then for the term of the trust, they'll continue. Well, the trust will be the owner, but after a certain term, the trust terminates and the house passes to the beneficiaries, likely the children. We'll just use for this example. And at that point, it becomes kind of weird. The people, the grantors, the ones who put the house in the trust, at that point have to pay rent back to their children, which is kind of a ridiculous idea. Going back to what Jeff was saying, explaining that to someone is
it's a little bit of a mind bender to start. Right? And then all of a sudden, when people wake up and realize it's another way then too of continuing to move assets out of their estate, fair market value rents, right? And so this is where the collaboration back with the accountants and the attorneys and everyone in terms of making those rent payments. But when they realize now they've moved an asset outside of their taxable estate, and they can be making rent payments to move more financial assets outside of the taxable estate, they can do it during their lifetime. They don't have to wait until they pass away. It's enormous leverage, but it does have to be modeled out again, which is what you lead on behalf of people. When you look at that, what did we say earlier? 13.61 is the federal exemption. So let's leave state out of it now because we have clients in 36 states, right? There's different applications, but at the federal level, that 13.61 per an individual, that call it 27 million and change for a couple because of portability between them, that's exempt. Most people think that they have to wait until they die and then it's exempt at that point in time. But if you have someone that's 50, 60 years old, they may have decades yet in front of them of growth. They want to move high growth assets outside of the taxable estate. Can you walk through that process of a lot of people hear gifting, they think charitable gifting. We're talking about estate gifting now, right? What does that mean? How does that look like? Can you walk through a little bit of an example? Maybe keep building on this house example. It's call it a $3 million house. I want to move it outside of my taxable estate. How does that actually work?
Yeah, so the house is a good example to stick with. It's coincidentally also a good time to be looking at these type of structures because they're also rate sensitive in a higher rate environment, which we're in today is more attractive for these. So at the time you put the house in the trust, it's moved out of your estate, or it moves out of the estate at the time the trust term ends. But at the time you gift it into the trust, that counts against your lifetime exemption. So $3 million house. There's a discounting factor we won't get into, but let's say it discounts it down to $1.5 million. So you use $1.5 million of that 26.2 lifetime exclusion to gift it out of your estate. The house appreciates 10% a year. You die or pass away 10 years from now, and that $3 million house is now worth significantly more than $3 million.
Right,
but you moved it outside of the estate for the price of $1.5 million.
Right. Right. And so all that growth and the value of that asset is estate tax free at that point to the next generation. So not waiting, not having growth in your lifetime, but having the growth outside of your taxable estate means using that now. And so does that does that change every year, that exemption amount, when people are planning for it, when people are thinking, yeah, I'll get to this 3-4 years down the road, right? How does that play out in Washington, D.C. when it comes to tax policy setting? If you can make sense out of Washington, D.C. for anybody.
Yeah. So right now, I certainly cannot make sense of it. So what we have to do is go with the legislation as it sits today. So we mentioned 26.2 is the combined total exemption amount today. And for the tax year 2026, that's going to be cut in half. It's a function of the sunsetting of Donald Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Certain parts of that are set to roll back after 2025. And for this conversation, the biggest part of that is the estate tax. So that 13.5 million or so per individual gets cut to about 7 million per individual at that point. So the benefit of doing this planning right now before that sunsetting is that the treatment of that $26 million today is that it's very much use it or lose it. You can move that full $26 million out of the married couple's estate today, and there's no clawback or penalty in 2026. If you don't use it, you lose that additional exemption amount that you had access to today.
Right. And so when you say sunsetting, no politician actually has to vote. It just is already built into the law as it stands today, that it gets cut in half at the end of 2025. So if we go back to the timeline, Jeff, of saying you've got to think through legacy planning, how this all works, what you want to decide before you make irrevocable decisions, right? You move that house out, you put that in place, it's now out. To unwind it is a waste of money on the front end. It's a costly on the back end. You're forfeiting benefit because you did that, and now you're going to pull an asset back into your estate. How does that timeline work with people now going, well, then I've got to the end of 2025 to figure this out? What would you say to someone in that case?
Well, so the Illinois way, early and often, right? You gotta be ahead of planning. So
those listeners outside of Illinois may need a little bit more explanation on early and often when you're talking about the way the voting booth may work or not.
The old saying in Illinois, or really Chicago, was, how do you want to vote? And it's early and often, as many times as I can, back in the day. But I think even going back to Kevin's original example, right? And even what I was talking about, where a lot of the most fulfilling moments that we have with our clients are when the unexpected happens. Well, that process goes a lot more smoothly when there's already a plan in place and we've already stress test those types of scenarios, a loved one passing or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If, even with opportunities that come up, right? An early retirement offer, an offer to purchase a business or a piece of property that you weren't expecting to ever sell, right? Those decisions become much easier to make when you've already got the foundation built. And now it's a quick turnaround because these types of situations, opportunities or problems, happen fast in the speed of life. And so again, staying ahead of those situations, having the baseline plans with the stress tests for all circumstances, from the basic planning to these more advanced wealth transfer strategies, is critical, so that when that thing happens, you're there, you're ready. Kevin can quickly show you, hey, you've got 2 years here. This is what we're going to do now, because it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's going to take you a period of time to get documents drafted, to get titles changed, to do whatever it is that you need to do to actually enact it. And that's on something that you've got 2 years to figure out.
Right.
So it is really about being, again, intentional, purposeful around those goals, getting it done now when you're not under duress, you're not under a timeline, because nothing good happens when things are getting rushed and having to get done quickly.
Yeah. And it ends up being the really important items that we're discussing. It just ends up being overcome by the tyranny of the urgent.
Yeah.
And a lot of that happens back into people's individual businesses, life, the kids, the grandkids, whatever. You have these urgent items that come into play versus carving out the time intentionally, which is where you started the conversation, and really being thoughtful of how you approach that and why you want to take the steps. One family that we're serving, a nine-figure case early on, working through some of the matters. And we go back to that pie of it's either family, it's charitable, or it's taxes, is stepping back saying, you don't have to explain to me your theory on taxes, right? But really help me understand, what is your philosophy around inheritance? What does this mean going to your kids at various ages, especially if they're, if they're younger, if they're older? What does it mean with grandkids? And what is that component with respect to charity? Again, during your lifetime, because then we can minimize the income tax, as well as then build in ways to work around the estate tax components of that before we go back. And so that was really even that next steps piece of thinking through philosophy of inheritance and next gen, what's empowering versus enabling, and then also charities. And not all charities are great charities, right? So really being selective and doing your due diligence on those organizations you're supporting too.
Absolutely.
So Kevin, let's go back to the example we did earlier, right? $100 million, somebody's got their businesses in that, illiquid assets. Let's say all of it's illiquid, right? They have very little liquidity outside. How would one think about an illiquid asset and the way that they're planning around that holding? The tools and techniques, because I hear from some people, well, after the event, after I have my liquidity event, then we need to sit down and talk about this. And it's like, well, yeah, we can. However, you're forfeiting, you're giving up so many great planning opportunities that you could be employing while you're still owning the company, right? In preparation for what that liquidity event could look like. What are your thoughts or your gut reaction in terms of what you'd be speaking to business owners about?
Yeah, so my first reaction is always to kind of look at what the major risks are of any client profile. In the case of a large illiquid business, really not a lot of other assets going on. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just say there's a $100 million business and really nothing else. You think what happens if the business owner were to pass away? That's a $100 million estate with a large estate tax bill and no method to pay it. So you either want to move the business outside the estate before the owner passes, one way or another, using one of the methods we talked about potentially, or you could use potentially a life insurance trust. And so what that would do is it puts a large life insurance trust outside the estate. So it's a tax-free benefit back to the family once you pass, and they're able to use that benefit to either pay the estate tax that arises from the business, or just help keep the business running, whatever they need. Because you want to avoid a situation of a forced sale of the business, potentially at an inopportune time, macroeconomic wise, or just if it's a business that you want to be your legacy, you don't want your beneficiaries in a position where they're forced to sell it because they have no other option.
Right. And so, I mean, as we continue to work through this, and all of our listeners know by this point in time, right, none of these items is a specific recommendation for anybody to be stepping back on. These are all thought-provoking discussion topics to explore, because you said there's multiple ways to do it, right? For the family that doesn't want to sell the farm upon the passing, they need liquidity. Use a life insurance trust. You can take part of the business and you could be gifting that out into an irrevocable trust ownership. And you could be doing that with non-voting shares. So you don't even have to give up control. You can maintain control with A shares and be gifting B shares that could go out. You could use a donor advised fund platform. And we've got clients gifting business interests to donor advised fund platforms, getting charitable deductions today. And then upon the event, capital gains is avoided because it's dropping straight into a charitable type entity, similar to the charitable trust topics. But tax treatments are very different from donor advised funds and charitable trusts and private foundations, both on the front end and the back end. So a lot of that collaboration back with tax counsel and the CPA, that are doing the tax returns, are doing not only the income tax returns, but the gift tax returns, and how to approach that and move that out. So Jeff, as you think through these different scenarios with families in this advanced planning, we talked about legacy, we talked about trying to get your head around that and what that means during your lifetime, some of the stumbling blocks, a little bit of a sense of urgency because none of us know what's going to happen after the end of 2025. So we have to go with what we know right now. The inertia that people have, right? If somebody's out there listening going, yeah, I've got whatever the number is, of $50 million, $200 million, I need to be thinking through these items. How do they even get started, right? Where do they get started beyond the legacy piece to start reviewing this and saying, I need to get this plan in place?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is the elephant and how to eat an elephant. It's one bite at a time. It starts with that, with assembling the right team of people around you that can help you frame that discussion, right? That can help guide you in the direction of, this is what I'm hearing you say. What about this? What about that? We haven't thought about this component. Kevin talking a lot about illiquid assets, from a family perspective, that provides a lot more challenges than just estate taxes, right? You got 3 kids and only one of them is active in the business. The other 2 don't want a business. They want cash. That puts the 3rd kid into a strap in and of itself. So it's not always just about the ones and zeros, right? The numbers of it. But again, it's getting that conversation rolling with someone that knows the ins and outs of how these things tend to work because they've experienced it before.
Yeah.
They've seen this game play out in a lot of different ways, and they know that every situation is going to be a little bit different, but here's how we have to figure out how it's different.
Yeah.
That then comes back to then getting that professional team around you that has the accountants, the attorneys, the advisors, right? The people that can lend the strategy to match the original discussion of goal and everything.
You're just so spot on. All these thoughts are now kicking through my mind because that family you talked about in terms of one's in the business, the others aren't. Right? One's an artist, the other's in the company. What is that estate equalization? How do you do that? Should it be equal? Right? How do you love your kids equally but treat them uniquely when it comes to these matters? What is quote unquote fair, right? I almost hate that word, but how you approach that within family, because you spend a lifetime creating this wealth, right? You don't want it to be divisive. You actually want it to be used to be bringing the family together. And yet there's potential that families don't share. They don't communicate. Let's just go, fast forward, right? All the planning's been done. We got the financial planning, the estate strategies in place. It all works well. How would you think about family meeting communication and what that means about the openness between one generation and another? You said you've experienced this even within your own family. Yeah. How does that dialogue work? What are some healthy examples for families and how they communicate what they've put in place?
Well, I think, sometimes it's easier to know what not to do because every family is going to be different, and even within each family, the way that you approach each individual member of that family is going to have to be specific to that person. But the one thing that I've seen not work universally is surprises, where they find out that this isn't going to work out the way that they being the child in this scenario, for example, finds out that they're not getting what they thought they were getting, and mom and dad never told them until they're about to get it. In other words, mom and dad are gone.
Right,
now
right.
They can't explain themselves. What happens in that scenario, in my experience, is that the kids turn on each other, right? And nobody wins in that scenario except for the lawyers. And we love our attorney friends, but we don't need to give them any more work than they have to have. We'd rather those assets be spent in inspiring their kids to live with joy and
right.
everything. Based on the legacy that mom and dad or Gen 1 or Gen 2 or whoever intended for it. So it is about helping kids understand what is happening. It also takes some of the stress off of the kids, right? If there's a generation or not even a generation, but a group of people in this world that truly are keep your cards close to the chest type people, even with their own family, right?
Yeah.
And what they aren't realizing when they do that is that their own kids are worried about them.
Yeah.
If they don't know that things have been set up, that things are in motion, that they have taken care of not just mom and dad, but everything else that we've already talked about around legacy taxes, all those things, right? They get worried. And that layers stress. And we all know that financial stress has an above average impact on our bodies and our relationships compared to most other types of stress, right? So it really is about having communication, sharing, even at the least, the idea that there is a plan in place. Here's your role in that plan. Even if it's not, here's the dollars involved and here's what you're getting or how you're getting it, but the why and really just the reinforcement that there is a plan in place. We aren't just ignoring this. You're not going to have to figure it out for us after we're gone. And it's not just going to fall on you. You're not going to get a box of records to figure it out.
Right.
I think that's kind of the core. And then how you go about doing that is going to be unique to each person involved in the process.
There's a book that I've referenced on these sessions before, handed out another copy the other day, Strangers in Paradise, where you end up with going, okay, the conversation in a household that's a $100 million plus is different because of the makeup, because of the complexity, the explanation that's there, than maybe 10 million or maybe even $1 million. Yet you're still dealing with people and emotions and dollars and cents. So it sometimes isn't about the size. It's that universal, don't have surprises. Open up. I had one couple that was like, the kids don't need to know about this. And, so we don't make an issue out of it because we're not going to talk about it. And I'm like, by not talking about it, you are making an issue out of it because you can't presume that the kids aren't, out of care and concern and out of worry and making sure that there's no surprises on the back end. Because we've also seen families that ended up tied up in contested estates that they were fighting with, other siblings with strategies that were set up with attorneys, not with, associated with Clearwater Capital, not associated, right? But we can't help but to come across these various really sad and wasted resources that could be put towards productive family, productive charitable intent versus taxes and costs just to try to settle disputes on that.
Absolutely.
And so you want to come back, Kevin, a little bit more on the technical aspect of someone putting these pieces together. And you spend a lot of time early on with, get me an inventory of a lot of materials, right? The documents, the statements. As you start going through those, what are some of the items that you're looking for and understanding, especially when you put on your CPA, auditor, historical lens that you're picking through? You're really trying to understand how all the pieces of the puzzle come together. Can you give a little bit of a glimpse in how that works?
Yeah. We really can only be as good as the data we're provided with and our understanding of that data. So much of where I spend my time is learning more about our clients' balance sheets, especially when we look at complex business owners. We have several with multiple businesses that are one's an LLC, one's a C Corp, one's a limited partnership. So those all have different implications, both from an income tax perspective, but also the ability to place them in different types of trusts or structures efficiently. So a lot of our time is really just spent understanding what those assets are and what our opportunities are with them based on how they're structured.
Yeah, because based on how they're structured, from the legal, the corporate structure gives the opportunities back into the retirement plan services side. If somebody's looking for an ESOP as part of an exit, well, okay, that's a qualified plan by definition. That has a whole stream of work around it, but depending on the corporate setup, that's either an opportunity or it's not. And you'd have to go through the technical aspect of how that gets approached, or carving out part of a business and moving that over, or having the family partnership where an individual, we have clients, 98, 99% of the assets are outside of the estate but they maintain control because they're the general partner. I mean, it's almost a private equity firm inside of the family structure that's been constructed between legacy trusts and GPs and LPs and how we do all of that in the thought process in order to work through these businesses. And even what those underlying businesses look like. We don't want to be the CFO inside the company. We're the CFO on behalf of the family. But a lot of these families, the largest assets they have are the businesses or the real estate, the financial assets, and how we look at those items to figure out what are the different mixes and matches that give people the liquidity that they need to live and also preserve it back for their family and organizations into the future. So as you think about families, clients that we're serving and into the future, how do you see all this space evolving over the next decade? Where do you see the needs for people? Are they going to become greater, less? I hear a lot about, and we talk a lot about the great wealth transfer that's taking place. Well, what does that mean, and how do you envision our industry, the families we're serving, the world that we're operating in, evolving over the next decade?
I think increasing complexity is going to be a challenge. We've never had more information and less knowledge in the world than we have right now. And so I think those two things are coming together at a really interesting intersection. So the role of the informed CFO for that family, I think will only get greater as wealth transfer between generations really starts happening. Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's going to be variable. But I don't, said another way, we've got a huge amount of assets built into one generation of Americans. Let's just stay with America for the United States for now. Gen 1 transitioning to Gen 2 in many of these cases can be treacherous for a lot of those, especially businesses, but everything, right? Yeah. Especially if it's not handled properly ahead of time, planned for, like you said, getting those strategies in place, but also back to the communication process. If your legacy goal is that your business continues to do the good work that it's doing today for the world in the future, it may be a hard pill to swallow, but it might not be with your kids at the helm. Right. Especially if you haven't been intentional about bringing them in and helping them learn the opportunity, right? Learn about the business, learn the importance of the responsibility that they're taking on. Right. So I think that generational passing is going to be very challenging for a lot of people, of course, because they'll be getting involved in things they've never done before, hence where the professionals can come in. But I also think it's really exciting because we're about to hit a whole new generation of economic prosperity worldwide, I think just in general, right? The idea of new business creation, new ideas, new opportunities being unleashed because of advancements in technology and science and everything that's good that we tend to kind of forget about in the world today with all the negative headlines that we have to sift through. There's going to be a lot of wealth creation that also happens, some of it funneled or fueled by the wealth transfer that's about to start, but a lot of it's going to be bootstrapped just like the previous generation did, but again, just differently.
Yeah. Well, even next generation, the picture jumped into my mind. Next generation doesn't mean that the 20-somethings, right? I mean, if you've got 80-year-old, founders that are passing away, that next gen is 50 and 60. Yeah. And back to still no surprises. And it's amazing, even at, middle life, which I like to consider 50s, 60s, middle life, not getting too old here. Yeah. But that is still the next generation. You still can't have surprises that come into play. Kevin, what do you think about the next 10 years of how this space evolves?
Yeah, I think the big elephant in the room is the sunsetting of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I think the quantity, well, in the near term, up until 2026, I think we'll see kind of a mad dash to the door to use up the inflated lifetime exemption amount. And then shortly after that, I think we'll see a lot of business owners that have businesses below that $26 million exemption as it sits today, that realize this is now something they need to be concerned with. That could be if you have a $8 million business today, you might not be thinking about it. You might have seen a headline about what the state transfer, the state exemption amount is, and thought it will never apply to you, but suddenly January 1st, 2026, it will, the way things sit today.
Right.
So I think the the largest thing as an industry that change we'll see is just the quantity of people that this will apply to is going to increase. If there's one thing we can count on legislators to do, is to also increase the complexity of the tax code, which provides great opportunities for the industry as well to innovate and create new structures as new tax code are implemented.
In the tools and technology, right? The modeling software, how we think about these things, the inputs, and that's continuing to progress, right? The ability for us to understand and get insights from the tools that we use when we get all the information loaded in, those insights are easiest. And I think this is going to be some of the power of technology, some of where artificial intelligence is going to help more with the basic planning, I think, than the advanced planning, right? Because the advanced planning gets back to some of the questions. Well, if you haven't figured out where you're going with it, if you haven't figured out what's truly important to you, how you want to leave a difference in the world, how do you not screw up the next generation with the wealth that's going to be there, not surprising them? You can put that into Chat GPT or any other source of information that's out there. And yet I find people need to process that, talk through it, work through that, because it's not so clean cut. It's not just a response to a script that gets loaded into a system to say, here's the answer. It's not just a math problem, which we need to do really well on the competency side. We need to lean planning and execution, but back to that character. That's what people want to leave their mark, right? That's where they want to make the difference in the world. So as we start wrapping up here, final thoughts, final encouragement for individuals that are out there that are trying to process planning. Because some people are like, I'm not a planner, I live in the day. It's like, well, you have to be intentional about everything that you're doing. What are some closing thoughts for individuals?
I think you hit it on the head. Everybody needs planning, from the most basic, do I have enough money to retire, to the advanced, I've got more than enough money than I'm ever going to need. How do I think about the legacy side, right? So everybody does need that plan. And I think, you're not necessarily doing it for yourself. You're doing it for your loved ones. You're doing it for your family. And that, I think, should be, for a lot of people, a big motivation to sit down and actually get this stuff figured out. And there's just a lot of opportunity that's out there if you do it right.
Yeah. Kevin, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'd say if you take nothing else away from this, it should be that today is the best day to start planning if you haven't, for no matter who you are, from basic plan to advanced plan. If you are in the advanced planning space, I'd say there is a larger sense of urgency just because of the tax landscape today and the rates we discussed. And if you look at all the tools we discussed, it's really not a one size fits all. It's every one of them is really specific to each individual client profile. So there needs to be a deep understanding between everyone involved to implement the right strategy and make sure it's successful.
Yeah. Well, I love working with you guys and what we do, the ability, the difference, the change that we can have in clients' lives and for their families, for the better, for them to do and achieve and leave the legacy that they want to create. To all of our listeners, thank you for listening in today. We hit a wide range of topics. It is collaboration. We do look at this as a team effort, not only within Clearwater Capital, but also with the estate planning attorneys, the transaction attorneys when it comes to M&A, the accounting firms and the accounting teams that are involved. There's a lot of work that takes place in collaboration as that role that we strive to achieve with our families as the chief financial officer back for them. We do encourage you to circle back with your professional team. If you have questions and you want to continue this conversation, please send us an email at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Thank you again for listening and have a blessed day.